So the project is called A Modest Proposal in a Black Box. So it's basically a double title. A Modest Proposal actually is a proposal to come up. It's a proposal to come up with a question of redistribution of values in the art world. Because we've been working as artists for quite a long time. And to make a living as an artist with not commercial representation is really a tough challenge, really. Yet we do know that from previous projects that were focused on the art market and what kind of financial context and financialization context this market is operating in, that there is plenty of money going around in the art world. It just doesn't seem to arrive on our account. So we're thinking, maybe we could think about financialization as a tool to allow for redistribution. Of course, there is also a funny part of this proposal, because the title, is a reference to an essay by Jonathan Swift. And Jonathan Swift, I'm sure you know, he's the author of Gulliver's Travels. And at a certain point, he also wrote a lot essays, and one of the essays is A Modest Proposal. It's an outrageous idea in which he proposes to solve the hunger crisis in Ireland by growing babies 1 year old and then eating them.
The rich could eat them.
The rich could eat them. We couldn't afford them. So there is some kind of parody version in this model that we propose, because for us, we don't see ourselves as providing solutions to specific questions. I think we rather see ourselves as trying to provide the right questions and trying to raise awareness around these questions. Hence, we decided not to disclose the modest proposal, but rather put it on a USB stick in a black box. And now I'm coming to the second part. The black box, you see it here. Black boxing is basically whatever you do not want to disclose about your product, you just put it in a black box and it's there, nobody can know. So the USB stick is contained in this black box. This is a 3D titanium printed box. Can you maybe say a little bit about how it came to be? We approached a company to produce this, and they were really kind of, they thought it was a joke, because 3D printing usually is about shapes in shapes, really complex forms. And the only thing we asked them is, how would you do the sealing basically of this box? And then they started explaining, oh, you have to have this grid, and the grid will carry the sealing. So we agreed, okay, forget about the walls, just print the grid, keep an opening, and we put the stick in while you're printing. This is nanotechnology. So it's actually welding with particles you cannot touch because they go through your skin. It's really very space engineering industry, basically. So we decide that we will shoot a scene while they were printing. And when we got in touch with them and said, can we come over to take a shot? They said, well, there's a slight problem. The machine went berserk. It totally fell down, broke down, and they couldn't finish the print. But they simulated printing, so we could do the shot, that was fine. It took 3 days to do the printing. Second version, still not okay. Third version, that's this version, still no sealing. So this company had to change their attitudes towards us, and we're like more into, wow, this is a really complex thing, bringing in engineers to rectify, and finally we were able to got a decent version of this box after 3 days of printing.
You can see the USB stick. You can also see it, but you have to look from a distance.
Yeah, from a certain height. Now, because of this project was, maybe you can tell something about London.
Yeah. But are you finished about the box?
The box is finished. It's, we can go into the floating parts through London.
Yeah. So as you can see, this box is levitating. It's flying. For us, this is like an image of financialization, like Ronny was talking about. So normally, if you have a piece of real estate, then that is hard to buy and sell because it's a big object and it costs a lot of money. But when you financialize it, it's easy to access for lots of investors all over the world because they can buy a share of the real estate, for example. So it becomes loose from the ground, it starts floating, so to speak, and accessible for everyone, and the value can start to circulate. So that's a bit a way to explain financialization. It's also how it started for ourselves, because in this film you see also a house where we are together with a lawyer, and the house is the starting point for our project together since 2006, where we started to work as an artist duo. And the idea in the beginning was how can this house create some liquidity for ourselves, like a stream of money without having to sell it. So we started with ideas like, okay, selling maybe 50 or 49% and keeping 51%. And so we talked a lot with lawyers, and all these ideas came slowly, and this is one of the projects that is also connected to financializing our house. We start, you see us in the house speaking about Art House Index here, and that's also the value of the house. An index which is created on values of art market, because it's an art house. At the same time, it calculates the value of ourselves as artists, and it also calculates real estate global markets. So this index is also part of this movie. And then we were invited for an exhibition in London, and then we decided to work on the financialization of big museum buildings, because okay, one house is a little small to financialize, and all the bankers we were talking to, okay, it's a nice idea, but it's not really a big business model. You have to think bigger. Okay, let's do museum, let's do collections, and maybe also goodwill, because some musea don't really have collections or don't have their own buildings. Some institutions don't have that. So when we were invited to London, we were very excited because London is the city of finance, and it has a real impact on the life of people there. And the place where we were invited was excellent, because you will see the building soon, I think. It's a small little house, little museum in the middle of a park. It's a Pump House Gallery, it's called. And next to this small little gallery in the park, there is a huge building, a power station, and they're regenerating it at the moment into a luxury real estate building which will house the offices of Apple, luxury lofts and shops, and so on and so on. So, and it's also situated in what they call an opportunity area. So they really want to lift up all the values with what they're doing there. Also, a new metro station will be developed. And what they also do is extract all these values for foreign direct investments, and the government is guaranteeing profit for all these investors. So this was like, okay, it's very inspiring and very problematic at the same time. So that's also one of the inspirations for us to look into, okay, financialization can be used in a bad way that is very risky for people living there, because they have to come up with all the money and the tax if these schemes go wrong. But financialization can also be used for in a good way to distribute values, or it could be used. That was our question. So here you can see the idea of the museum and the collections being financialized, and then creating through dividend, artist dividend, a cycle of value. So the investments come back to the artist, they can start to create again, then it flows back into the museum collection, investors, so you get a kind of circle of values to create a kind of ecology that instead of artists working for free, there is some value returning. That's the idea.
So basically it's trying to instrumentalize the current way of doing things, but change it around by using financialization as a positive tool, as an inclusive tool, which today it usually is not. It's very exclusive and it's basically there for accumulation of private value. We try to understand it as a tool for accumulation of social value. And in that sense, it's ironic, the proposal, because we know it is not the case today, but we imagine some future possibility, and it might be very tomorrow's future basically, because you can use a knife, as you know, as a weapon, but also as a tool. So any technical instrument can be used in different ways. It just depends on the people using it. And that's why we wanted to launch this kind of proposal. It's not very modest, of course, it's very ambitious in a way. But I think that is how we see our responsibility as artists to raise the proper question and actually try to put in our 5 cents to improve the way things are going in the world, and not scare away from the complexity of it, because of course debate in money and art is always a bit tricky. Art is priceless, as they say, so it has no price, but on the other hand, for sure, we see in reality that art is instrumentalized in many diverse ways. Also in terms of its potential financial values, not only its social and aesthetic values. So yeah, I thought at a certain point our interests were coming together in terms of this critique of an infrastructure or of a way of doing things that we've been addressing for the last couple of years, let's say 10 years, that we've been trying to focus on. And yeah.
That's a power station.
Maybe you know the album of Pink Floyd, Animals, where the little pig floating in the air, that's that power station. In the 19th century it was the poorest area of London, and today it will be the most affluent. It is a humongous investment. It is a Malaysian company with government backing, and of course there's in the Guardian there's several articles. It's one fraudulent scheme. Also part of that money in fraud came to produce The Wolf of Wall Street, the Hollywood picture. So it is really, you can't imagine these things that are going on there. But if your next visit to London, you will see that they're actually pulling it off. They are restoring the power station. The first people that are going to live there. It's really international big investors that come to buy the flats, Chinese, Arab, you know. And it's really problematic because lots of parts of London are just empty because they don't live there. It's just an investment.
It reminds us of the modern Tate Modern, which was also a power station before.
Exactly.
Yes, and the same dimensions, I can imagine.
It's actually the same architect.
Okay. Yes, and this pump house gallery exists already. This is a running gallery, no?
So the pump house gallery was a Victorian pump station to provide water in the park, because next to the power station was a 19th century park, and we used that in the exhibition in London at the time as a model for speculation, because a lot of speculation is going on. And at the time when they were constructing the park, it was just gardens, and people had to sell their garden or disowned. So they put in fake houses on their garden to get more money. So I think we're all speculators in a certain way, and that's also part of the modest proposal. It's not about moralizing, speculating. If you want to speculate, fine, speculate with your money, do whatever you want with your money, but make sure you contribute to the social dimension of our society. Everybody can become a rich person, no problem, but you have to pay your taxes because you enjoy the collectiveness of our society, and that makes possible all these things. And that's also the modest proposal. It's basically redistribution of values that we try to kind of promote through financial technologies. And Tate, of course, is an excellent example of a gentrifying instrument. And this will be another one. There will be no museum, it's just the grandeur of industrial heritage. And it is a cathedral, I can assure you. It's really amazing. It's like, we're like critiquing it all the time, but whenever we go there, we're like, wow. So, we feel guilty about liking in this building so much. It's really enormous. And the way they are restoring it is, the chimneys, for instance, they're like Greek columns, and they're actually they were constructed part by part, and there were a lot of protests because people were afraid they would take them down, and then they were a bit ruinous, we can't restore them, cost fortunes. No, they actually are repouring meter per meter these concrete structures. They did it. So that, of course, they went to a big default, not enough money, and then the tax scheme that Katleen was referring to, tax increment financing, and that's the tricky part, is the next 25 years of augmentation of tax revenue of that area is put in an envelope to finance the accessibility of that area. They need 2 subway stations. So the tax revenue, the added tax revenue, so the level of today is here. Whatever comes on top of it from now on for the next 25 years, you have to put it in an envelope, and that you can use to pay us back our loan, the international financiers' loan, to get the money or to produce the new subway stations. Of course, you can imagine that if this economic projection of future value is not realizing, well, then the deal is that the taxpayer has to pay the loss. So this is the guarantee of everybody's tax money needs to be invested in that loan. And that is the worst part, because I'm not finished yet. This is a decision that cannot be overruled by any political decision for the next 25 years. So there's no coming back to it. So that, of course, is why we did this. This is a publication. A publication is the result of a symposium we organized, because however inspiring our proposal might sound like, it is a kind of problematic proposal, because we say, well, we organize this market, we tax the market, and whatever taxation comes in goes to the artist community. That's not how our democracies function. Our democracies function, we raise money, and then there's a parliamentary debate that decides on how to spend that money. What we kind of propose is almost corporatist value. You know? We raise the money, so now the money is ours. No, that's not how it. So we wanted to problematize this proposal and had 6 people, much more smart than we are, to give critique on this proposal that's in this booklet, which I think is offered for sale here. So. And you can browse it freely, it's here on display. Also explains a bit more about the proposal itself, and the script of the film is in there. So. But maybe enough said.
No, could you elaborate actually about the object, how you precisely plan to, what kind of a deal you want to make with institutions to keep the object in the story?
The proposal, the financial proposal is in this stick, the USB stick, which is printed inside the object. So the idea is we made a contract with a lawyer who is also in the film, that's him.
It's a real lawyer.
It's a real lawyer.
Who plays a lawyer?
So we made a contract with him, stipulating how this would work. So an institution who wants to implement the proposal and this value circulation, they have to buy the object first, and when they want to access it, they have to destroy the art object. Then they have a certain amount of time to look if the proposal appeals to them and if they want to implement it. And if not, then they have to resell the destroyed object to us. We call it for a peppercorn consideration. That was in the 19th century to say, like, to offer it back for peanuts.
For a symbolic
or
fee.
a peppercorn. And then we print the object again, and then it can be resold to an institution. But we like the idea that the institutions have to destroy the art object in
Well,
order.
if you want the money, then you need to destroy the art, right? So,
Yeah,
because
so that's how it's put in the contract.
And how much does it cost?
See?
it's negotiable. No, it's part of the proposal that if you think of a proposal, then you also need to think of how could this function in reality. And the strangest thing happened to us actually in this project because, yeah, I told you they were very uncomfortable. When we were people visiting the show, or the people at the gallery said there is one person who's always revisiting the show. And I was like, okay, it's a fan, good. So when we did the symposium, he also was there. He immediately came to us, and he was a hedge fund manager. And he said, I really like your proposal. There's only one thing wrong with it. And I said, what's that? Well, that I didn't think of it. And we were like kind of a bit taken by that because we're not into finance at all. We kind of find it interesting, but we're not economics, so it's not really what we understand. But we try to engage in a conversation with him basically to understand better what he saw in this kind of proposal. But that was really not the question. He wanted to know what we knew, and we were not supposed to know what he knows. So that was a wake-up call to understand true finance, and the way finance actually works most of the time is private accumulation, as I said, and not the social potential it has.
So he's probably using the ideas for his own
No,
account.
we don't know.
We don't know, but it's possible.
You can. It's a
Yeah.
free world, so
Mhm.
no harm done.
And as we said, financialization can be used in both ways. For private accumulation, or what we try to communicate is the social dimension of it.
Yeah, it's potential.